This is a sweet stoichiometry problem. When glucose is consumed, it reacts with oxygen in the body to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. How many grams of CO2 would be produced if 45 grams of C6H12O6, which is glucose, completely reacted with oxygen? The molar mass of glucose is 180.16 grams. First step, identify the given substance and the wanted substance. Well, they're giving us 45 grams of glucose, so that's our given. So I'm going to put a G right under glucose here. G is for given, not for glucose. And the wanted substance, they're asking how many grams of CO2? Well, CO2 is the wanted substance. And now the units here, they're asking for grams, and they're giving us grams. So this is a gram-gram problem, and if we look at this, we've already circled our starting point and our ending point. So we're going to start with 45 grams of glucose. So 45 grams of glucose times 1 over the molar mass of glucose gives us the moles of glucose. Okay? Moles of glucose times this mole ratio will give us moles of CO2, which is what the substance we're trying to find the grams of. Then multiplying that by the molar mass of CO2 over 1 mole of CO2 will give us grams of CO2, which is what is wanted in this problem. So let's start writing some of that out. Let's start with writing the grams of glucose. So 45 grams of glucose, 45 grams of C6H12O6. And then per our roadmap, we have to multiply it by 1 mole of glucose divided by the molar mass of glucose. So 1 mole C6H12O6 divided by the molar mass of glucose, which, thank goodness, they tell us is 180.16 grams. 180.16 grams C6H12O6. And per our roadmap, once I multiply that out, I would get grams of glucose. So let's see if the units work out. Grams of glucose, and we would get moles of glucose. Okay, which those are the remaining units. But we're not going to stop and calculate that. We're going to keep going across our map here. So if we have grams of glucose and multiply it by the mole ratio, we'll get moles of CO2. So what's the mole ratio in this case? Well, mole ratio is wanted over given, so that would be 6 moles CO2 over given, which is 1. This is an understood 1 out here. 1 mole of C6H12O6. Let's look at what cancels. Moles of C6H12O6 cancels with moles of C6H12O6, and the remaining units are moles of CO2. Well, we have moles of CO2 now. If we multiply that by the molar mass of CO2 divided by a mole, that'll get us our answer. So let's multiply that by the molar mass of CO2. Let's see, CO2, the carbon is 12, oxygen is 16, but we've got 2 of them, so that's 32. That's 44.0 grams. So the molar mass of CO2, 44.0 grams of CO2 per 1 mole of CO2. Now moles of CO2 can cancel. And we're finally ready for our answer. 45 times 1 divided by 180.16 times 6 divided by 1 times 44.0 divided by 1 gives me 65. Now, how many significant figures? They gave us 2 sig figs here, so instead of saying 65 point something, I think the proper answer is 66 grams of CO2. 66 grams of CO2. And now let's check and make sure we answered the question. How many grams of CO2? 66 grams of CO2. And we're finished with that problem.